Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council...
Just waiting till the sound is on. Good afternoon and welcome councillors, staff and the ratepayers that are here. Welcome to you. It's great to be here. I do have 4 apologies today from Councillor Finlay, Soward, Stosenchek and Daking. And just a reminder, if you've got a mobile, if you could switch it off as it does interfere with our recording, and we are welcoming those that may be listening at home or anywhere in the office as well. So please be seated. Thank you. Just while I'm on my feet, I just want to mention that yesterday it was a privilege to go to a morning tea for the Launceston City Community Christmas. Deputy Mayor was there as well, representing the council and the Rotary Club. So just to say they gave a certificate of appreciation for the funds and also the support that we continue to give for their Christmas community event they held on Christmas Day every year, and it was good turnout. Many volunteers get involved with that, so that's a pleasure to get that, and they do a fantastic job, and I think each of the organisations involved, they rotate it around each year for the organisations, but they do a great job with that. Any declaration of interest from councillors? No? Someone happy to confirm the minutes of the 25th of March? Councillor Spencer, seconded Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We have no deputations, no petitions. We do have a community report. I take it that Graham Foster is here and Jeff Hockley. That microphone there, thank you. Welcome. You've got the floor.
Fumbling for my glasses. Mayor Albert Van Zetten and councillors, thank you for the opportunity to address you today as the President of Launceston Players. There's been talk about a book being written to record the Launceston Players' long history with the original intention to mark our 75th anniversary. This did not happen. Even every now and again it's resurfaced, but nothing again has happened. About 6 years ago, we commenced a conversation with Dr. Thomas Gunn with a view to writing this book, with the then committee making the decision to proceed. After considerable research, the first draft is now completed, and from this source document, the book is now being compiled and it's in its final stages of preparation. In conjunction with the Tamar Valley Writers Festival, we will be presenting this final history as part of the 2021 Writers Festival in September, which will also mark the Launceston Players' 95th anniversary. In his report to the committee, Dr. Gunn has revealed that he has found the project to be fascinating and discovered a lot of interesting historical facts. Culturally, it is very important work as it records nearly 100 years of community theatre in Launceston, of which the Launceston Players have always played a central role as one of the oldest continually operating theatre societies in the Southern Hemisphere. We aim to publish the book in 2022. We have self-funded the research and writing and exploring different opportunities to help fund its publishing.
Mayor and councillors, on behalf of the committee of the Launceston Players, may I say how privileged we are to have the opportunity to address you. And on their behalf, I personally thank the council for its strong and committed approach to theatre arts in this city. The Launceston Players are once again back on stage next week, as it happens, with its latest production called The Bridesmaid Must Die, a very black comedy in which the audience gets to choose which of three obnoxious bridesmaids meets an untimely end. But in keeping with the tradition the players have maintained for nearly 95 years, we have another groundbreaking production planned for September, an extraordinary world premiere. It's a musical called Marjorie Unravelled, about Tasmania's Marjorie Bligh, claimed to be the inspiration for the Dame Edna character created by Barry Humphries. Local playwright Stella Kent has written a wonderful libretto. Local musician Carlin Love has written the music for it. Matt Taylor, a recent NIDA directing graduate from Launceston, will direct, and a host of local talent will contribute to costumes, staging, props and so on. The Players have a long history, and it's included world premieres, Australian firsts, Tasmanian and Launceston premieres, and here's another one. We acknowledge the Council's continued support of our company and look forward to big celebrations for our 100th birthday in 5 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President and Vice President. Thank you for that. And it's always a pleasure to go and watch the performances that my wife and I love when we've been there, so appreciate it and all the work that you put in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to public questions on notice are there for those to read and answer. Any other public questions without notice for today? No? Okay. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included in agenda item 9, the Planning Authority. So we have 9.1. I have no speakers for 9.1. That's correct, I think, isn't it? No speakers for 9.1. Councillor Mackenzie's moving the motion. Seconded Deputy Mayor. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, Mayor. I'd just like to speaking in favour of the motion. I guess the greatest consternation is obviously the removal of trees, which is always a challenge in a city like Launceston, where trees are something that we greatly appreciate. Noting that the 7 or 10 trees, I think 7 of them are poplar trees and 3 osters, I think. Anyway, they are non-native trees. The proposal is that these trees be removed to enable the building works to take place at the University of Tasmania on their new site there behind the architecture building, and also to enable bikeways and so forth to be put in place. And whilst I don't like to see trees go, I think the reality is when the building's built, those trees will sort of almost morph between 2 buildings anyway, and I think, as the arborist has said, would struggle to survive based on the building around them. I think overall, when we look at heritage, there are no heritage issues associated with those trees on the basis that they've probably only been there since the early 90s when the site was reclaimed from the old railway yards. And as lovely as they are, there are other trees in that vicinity. And they will be replacing the 10 trees with 14 at least new trees and a greater landscaping plan that's being dealt with on the whole site there, which I think is going to invigorate the property as a place of rest and relaxation in and around the buildings that are there. So I think the urban design that's been put in place will actually more than impact favourably to the amenity of the area. And whilst, as I say, trees will go in this particular instance, I believe this is just part of the actual development application and the redesign and redevelopment of UTAS on the site.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Of course, as my fellow councillor pointed out, it always is a pity when trees get removed, and I'm, disappointed that the design couldn't have included these trees in it, notwithstanding the fact that they will seem to end up being, if they were saved, be sandwiched between two buildings, which wouldn't do them any favours at all. Of course, if you said to anyone, you're going to remove a big tree, but don't worry, we're going to replace it with a little tree, it's fine, depending on the tree and the situation, you wouldn't get a positive response. It's not, necessarily the best way to deal with these things. These trees were planted, it's my understanding, being poplars on ground that is quite soft, and also ground that potentially had sort of pollutants in it, that these poplars were chosen because of their root system, because they could help to stabilise the ground, and they also do help to clear the toxins in the soil as well. So that's been part of their purpose there, and that's my understanding why they were planted. Happy to be corrected on that, but that was just sort of a long-term understanding in Launceston. And of course, we're talking about building on a floodplain. I know that 2 weeks ago I voted in favour of the refurbishment of the stone building. I consider that building, it already exists, and therefore doesn't really sit in the same category as new buildings on a floodplain, and I won't be supporting this development.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against? So that's 2 against, the rest are 4. That is carried. So we've got 9.2. We do have some speakers for 9.2. And just to remind speakers, there is a time limit of 2 minutes, and you will hear the following sound after when the 2 minutes are up. So when you hear that, you know your time is up. Thank you. So the first speaker I have is Peter De Angelis.
Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. Thank you for taking the time to hear our concerns. We are generally alarmed about the massive size and the close proximity of the proposed residence on our boundary that will impact our existing tree and our privacy. We thank you for acknowledging the importance of protecting our tree. However, the tree has a canopy of 2.5 metres over the boundary, and the proposed dwelling sits a mere 1.2 metres off our fence line. We have sought the opinion of a respectable horticulturalist to provide us an independent opinion, and a report is attached, along with a petition from the residents of Galvin Street. Our ancillary dwelling is incorrectly shown as a shed on the plans and will be less than 2 metres from the proposed dwelling. Planning has reported the treatment and design has greatly reduced the scale and the bulk to minimise visual intrusion. We respectfully disagree. We believe it is unnecessarily large in scale, and the design is completely out of character with the surrounding properties of the area. A proposed reduction of 200 millimetres is a little bit laughable. We acknowledge your recommendation of a new 2.1 metre fence to be constructed by the developer's expense. That will help the privacy and is appreciated. However, the majority of the existing fence was very old and rotting and was funded completely by us, as the owners of 34 Galvin refused to contribute. If this proposal is approved, can it please also be stipulated that the fence is replaced with a 2.1 hardwood paling fence to the same standard of the existing? Given the previous lack of compliance with law, how will Council mandate this? Council will be aware of traffic and parking is very limited, and a second crossover of the property removes another parking space from the street. Our business requires young children to be dropped off and collected at the beginning and end of each day, and parking is already problematic for families with young children. We note that planning has recommended the condition rather than the proposal, and Taswater have advised the combined stormwater and sewage system is already at capacity. Lastly, we do not object to people... Am I allowed to finish this? Lastly, we do not object to people making improvements to the properties and certainly tried to support our neighbours at 34 in any way we could during the recent renovations by providing water, power, scaffolding and parking. We are disappointed that this proposal has not shown any consideration for the privacy and amenity of the neighbouring properties. If they are determined to build a second dwelling, we do not understand why it can't be a bit smaller and a single-storey dwelling.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Christine Hepburn.
Mr Mayor and councillors, development is not the issue for me here. For instance, development of a single-storey building would eliminate at least 2/3 of the concerns raised in my representation. It would be expected that the planning approval process is in place to avoid any situation where development for one residence comes at a distinct disadvantage and with untenable impact to lifestyle conditions for 9 other existing residences. Negative changes that none of these residences could have foreseen. If council members allow this development to go ahead as is, I request surety that the developer will erect the recommended 2.1 metre rear boundary fence prior to the commencement of any work taking place. This will eliminate damage being done to my shed wall and minimise any associated reverberation into my home. I also request clarity that the fence will be constructed right across the boundary length and that the shed wall does not constitute any part of that fence. The bottom of the windows overlooking my private space sits at 4.4 metres with a clear viewing area of 2.1 metres above that height. With the additional height of land on 34 Galvin Street, it means the windows tower over my shed by 4.5 metres and higher again on the fence line beside it, thereby making it impossible for me to have any privacy after stepping out my door and right across the current private sitting area, clothesline space and walkway. The proposed corner planting will take 5 to 10 years to mature to a maximum height of 2.4 metres, and that one tree does not cover the areas mentioned. I also request privacy screens to be built on both sides of the deck and fixed opaque windows installed on the living room wall overlooking my private space. I appreciate and respect 3 words: complies, acceptable and appropriate, used in the recommendation, fit a theoretical plan, yet theory fails to understand the unacceptable conditions you will be consigning to us by approving the proposal as stands.
Thank you.
And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Your time is up. Are there any other speakers? I've got none on the list. No? There is? No. Thank you. So we have item 9.2. Someone happy to move a motion? Councillor McKenzie moving the motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Councillor McKenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Just if I could start with just asking a couple of questions first, Mayor.
You may.
Just in regards to the tree that's been talked about and the protection mechanisms that are required, could the officer explain the methodology of how that works under the Act?
General Manager Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. So I guess the condition was put into the recommendation in response to a concern that was raised during the advertising period. It's not a scenic management area. It is a tree on a neighbouring property that's built quite close to the fence, and it's a large tree. However, in recognition of the concerns, the officer has recommended a condition that no damage be caused. The standard is quite complex, and so the recommended condition is that the Australian standard be applied to protection of that tree, and in recognition that there is some concern, officers can certainly proactively reach out to the developer before they commence to understand how they're going to apply the Australian standards to the protection of that tree, which the horticulturalist report that's been submitted today after the advertising period does suggest that it's 1.5 metres from the fence, and the development that's proposed is 1.2 metres from the fence. So again, I'm not a horticulturalist or an arborist, but that suggests that there is an opportunity to provide sufficient protection for that tree during the development process.
Thank you.
Thank you. You wish to speak?
Just two other questions. Just based on the comments made by the last speaker, one with the privacy screens. I noticed there are some privacy screens that have been conditioned. I'm not sure whether they are relevant to the windows that the last representative was speaking against.
So the condition has been included on the permit for where there's windows or balconies that are within the 3 metres to the side boundary, or 4 metres, 3 metres within a side boundary. Now, in respect to the rear boundary, a setback is required of 4 metres, which is provided for on the site plan. So that complies with the acceptable solution, and it was considered no further measures were required for privacy in those instances.
Don't go just yet. And the second question was just with regard to the fencing, and I guess the requirement of the fencing being put in place before the development starts. Is that something that we can condition?
There is a condition on the permit that requires a 2.1 metre high fence along the rear boundary. We can certainly negotiate with the applicant to be able to install it prior to construction.
Thank you.
The condition has been written in that the fence should be constructed prior to use commencing. It wouldn't normally be a requirement, a condition to construct fences prior to development works being completed. I understand why it's been suggested that that might be possible, but the builders have to be able to access the site and do the construction work, and so often it's not practical to complete the fencing until after that work's been undertaken. So in theory we could, but the planner hasn't recommended the condition in that way this time.
So to protect, if that was the case, to protect the rear neighbour, is there any ability for us to not approve occupancy until such stage as that's done?
It is a condition of the permit as recommended that the fences be completed before the use commences.
Okay. Right, thank you.
I think you've got some other questions. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks, Mayor. My question is with regard to the topic raised by one of the representatives concerning the building being regarded as an ancillary dwelling, or therefore if there have been any challenges in that regard, and has that conversation occurred prior to today?
I don't think that has any relevance on the application that we're looking at today.
Because?
Well, it's showing as a structure on a neighbouring property, and so I don't think that has any impact to what's proposed.
Perfect, thank you. And the other question, a subsequent one to that raised by Councillor Mackenzie, with regard to the setback and the rear boundary fence, you referenced that because it was compliant, because the setback was compliant, nothing further was required. Could you just, for the benefit of those that have raised that as an issue in the representations, just expand upon that further in terms of the scheme?
Yep, so where you've got a window or deck which has a floor level above 1 metre, you require a setback of 3 metres to the side boundaries and 4 metres to the rear. Now, the proposal is set back 4 metres to the rear boundary, and so complies with the acceptable solution.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer, is that a question? Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I've just got concern about the stormwater. If there's a problem with the capacity, will that affect any of the neighbours in the near future, or has Taswater got to be informed that they've got to upgrade it?
There is a condition on the permit that requires on-site detention, And Taswater have also issued approval through a SPAN, which includes some upgrades of works.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. My question is just in regard to the rear fence, where we asked for it to be 2.1 metres. I did notice there was an existing building on the fence line, which may not be 2.1 metres high. I didn't go down to measure it. So I'm just wondering what the scenario is there. Will they, once the building's been completed, and let's assume they build the fence, would they build the fence past that wall, if you like, put that back into their property and therefore build back inside their own property line by a small amount, or will they actually build to the existing structure that's there? What's the intention and the perhaps planning permit?
The condition on the permit requires a 2.1 metre fence along the boundary. So a wall can be used as a fence, however, depending on the height of that wall, but they can also build up to put a fence along the wall if required.
So is the wall 2.1 metres high, do you know?
I can't confirm that, I'm sorry.
Okay, right. Thanks.
Councillor Walker has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to go back for a second, you said that there is a requirement for on-site detention. Is that for stormwater?
Yes.
And where's that located? I couldn't see it in the plan.
No, it's not shown on the site plan, but it is conditioned as part of the permit.
Well, then can you describe how that will be contained? Will it be underground or?
It is usually underground, but I don't have the details of that.
And what capacity would that be? Don't know.
I can't answer that, no, sorry.
Very good. I just also want to ask some questions in regards to the objective to provide for outdoor recreation. And it would seem as though the proposed development is going to have what's seen as complying a reasonable private open space with it, but the existing dwelling at the same time won't have the same open space at all. It'll have mostly impervious space with a small garden at the front, is that right?
They'll be utilising their existing deck as their private open space.
And is that deemed as complying with creating open space?
Yes,
An
it
open
was.
deck? Even though when we say in here that we're talking about outdoor recreational space consistent, reasonable space for the planting of gardens and landscaping, that would be a deck.
They're utilising the deck, yes, and they have areas at the front of the property for planting of gardens.
Because I understand, I mean, we're looking at a DA for the additional property, but it has an obvious impact on this property as well, as it removes a lot of their existing gardens and landscaping space. I'm just not quite clear, is that something that we can consider in assessing this DA?
Yes, it was considered as part of the assessment.
And I suppose my other question goes to the visual impacts that are caused by the apparent scale or bulk of the dwelling. And, you know, that would appear to be the properties immediately adjacent to the building. Because this development proposal goes outside the bounds of the building envelope, do you think that that has an impact on the amenity, an additional impact on the amenity of the neighbours, let's say up the hill, 32 Galvin Street, as well as, to maybe a lesser extent, the properties below in Hampton Street? I mean, I know it doesn't take their shadows, or it doesn't impede their shadowing, but it certainly impedes their privacy and their amenity.
Thanks, Mayor. The assessing planner has assessed the amenity as part of the DA assessment against the planning scheme and made recommendations accordingly.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak?
Thank you, and thank you, councillors, for all of your questions, and thank you for the representatives who have spoken today and written to us during the process of this DA. We're faced with yet another DA where there's a house being built in a backyard, which seems to be a prevalent way of developing in this day and age, and I guess it meets our desire of having more dense housing in our community and utilises our services better. Do I like all of the ones that we see? The answer is no, I don't. Could this been scaled differently and made smaller and therefore fitted in better? Yes, it could have. The reality is that the developer has put forward a proposal as we see before us today. Based on the questions that have been asked, based on the answers that have been given, and particularly in relation to amenity, because I think that's the big issue that we're dealing with the scale of it. Unfortunately, the view isn't seen to scale. The overshadowing in this particular instance, because of the way the sun oscillates around the house, actually doesn't create much in the way of overshadowing. Obviously, there's the potential detriment to a substantial tree on one neighbouring boundary, for which there's some conditions in place to try and protect its scale. I've also known where we've looked at things like this and we've decided to vote against them, and then find that there's nobody who actually take on the planning for us to actually challenge it in the tribunal, because it basically fits within the planning scheme. Whilst there are some discretions that have been used in here, our planner has used his judgment in coming up with the fact that those planning elements are still sufficient for this building to fit within the planning scheme. As a consequence of that, I'm looking at from a planning point of view, and I hear and understand, and would I like that being plonked in the backyard of the house beside me? Probably not. But the reality of it is that yard has the capacity to take a building based on our planning scheme. How they built it has used discretions and probably the building envelopes to the nth degree, but have satisfied our officer that that can fit within the basis of the planning schemes and the discretions that are allowed to us. So I believe today we have no other option but to approve the DA.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McKenzie. You have said it like yourself. I also would prefer that this wasn't a two-storey dwelling, but I can understand the builder and the developer wanting to maximise what he does to make the new property as good as for him to live in or to sell as he can. The reality is, as Councillor McKenzie said, when you live in the inner city, we don't yet have a planning overlay that says if you have single-storey houses, you can only build a single-storey house in the backyard. If we had that, we'd be perhaps wouldn't see this same issue, and we would have people that would be happy with the increase. That is something we can perhaps consider at a future time, but certainly not for this development application. So, like Councillor McKenzie, I'll be supporting this. I also have, as he said, would I like it next door to me? Probably not. Having lived in a two-storey house with three others around me, you don't notice your neighbours going into the backyard, so I think you get used to it. It isn't something that people like it, and any change is always a problem. But by and large, having my neighbours on either side of me can look into my backyard, I never notice them, and I never look in their backyard. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Like other councillors, I concur that I have sympathy for the community and I have reservations about the height of this dwelling, but as has been suggested, it does fit within the planning scheme, and if it's compliant, there's really nowhere for us to go. But what I will point out is there has clearly been goodwill between neighbours in this community, and when we discuss these kinds of complicated planning matters, this is what will make all the difference in the end. If the people who live on the border of this property can continue that goodwill and have those conversations and help the developer be compliant, that's what will make the difference. So I agree, this is not the kind of planning we always want to see, but time and time again, it is the kind of planning decisions we have to make because of the nature of the city that we live in. So I wish you all the very best, and yes, you have my sympathy.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. You certainly have my sympathy too, and unfortunately the development doesn't have my support, and I feel like some councillors might have stolen my thunder today. I really do feel as though this idea that we can make it fit in the existing planning scheme and yet we can't do anything about changing the planning scheme, that's just the way it is. it no longer carries water. These developments are coming along one after the other. There's no doubt another dozen out there in the planning stages that will come before us. And then there'll be another dozen, and then there'll be another 2 dozen. We do have the power to add and amend the planning scheme, and that is something that we definitely have to address. Of course, we haven't addressed it at the moment, but I'm not satisfied that this building, which is outside the planning envelope, which impinges on the amenity of its neighbours, which puts pressure on an existing significant tree, and which also provides an extremely small amount of outdoor space for one of the properties, is something that is compliant with the planning scheme. I'm quite prepared to accept the argument that we might not find a planner who is willing to defend that decision. Then so be it. Then it becomes even more apparent that the planning scheme needs to change. So be it. But I will not be supporting this development application. I would love to see a single-storey building in this location. I would love to see a development that's sympathetic with its surrounding neighbours, but that's not what we have before us today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I had to rise to speak with regard to this application because this is not an oratory competition. This is not us, putting out any ideas and concepts that we want to bring before the council into the future. This is about considering 34 Garvin Street based on the planning scheme that we have today, based on the standards that are requiring council discretion and based on those that are not consistent and relies on performance criteria. Lots of the people that I've heard speak, I agree with them in terms of their personal circumstance, but when you read the standards that require council discretion, you read the performance criteria, there is simply no room to move other than to support this application based on the planning scheme that we have, based on the rules that we're working within today, considering this particular development application. Everything else are just weasel words and wants to do into the future, which I might support, but are not at all anything to do with 34 Garvin Street.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
I think it's all been said, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? That's 1 against. The rest is 4. The motion is carried.
Mr Mayor, I wonder if I could bring forward item 16.1 on the agenda.
That's a good idea, since we have a lot of speakers for that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris, thank you. I'll put that to the table. All those in favour? And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we'll now bring forward item 16.1, which is the Future of Relbia project petition. So we do have a number of speakers. I'll remind people the bell will go at the end of your 2 minutes. First, we have Anthony Lowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for letting me speak to the Future of Relbia petition today. I'm disappointed in the response and recommendations from council because it doesn't answer any of the questions posed by the petition before you. A majority of residents in Relbia ask you to pause and fix the Future of Relbia process because there have been some identified major flaws with it. Let me clarify what those flaws are. Only 21% of residents attended the initial meetings with MESH in Albert Hall despite a major communication and advertising campaign by council. 26 residents did not receive voting papers in December, and these had to be hand-delivered 2 months later in February. The 3 voting options determined by the Albert Hall meetings in no way reflected the community feedback in the What We Heard summary brochure. As I mentioned last time, 3 versions of urbanisation does not maintain a rural character. The voting papers presented 3 scenarios to residents, and then a 4th scenario was presented by council in the Q&A document sent to residents after the communication consultation period had ended, as the recommended option by MESH. This option wasn't even on the original voting form. The council only received 230 responses when this project was heavily advertised and open to the whole of Launceston, with a population of 66,693 people. That is a response rate of 0.3% of the surveyed population. And finally, the MESH feasibility report. It failed to mention serious environmental issues in Relbia, such as the 2 species of endangered frog seen in Jingler's Creek, the shallow soil and historical flooding issues, the Heritage Protection Order on convict sites in and around Relbia Road, and the federal PANS Ops restrictions on development under flight paths in Relbia, being less than 10 nautical miles from Launceston Airport. I'm reminded of the famous words by General David Morrison, who said, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." As councillors, when you vote on this petition today, you are personally accepting or rejecting the poor standard of this process. I hope that you all expect much higher standards and that you agree with me that the council doesn't accept 21 out of 100 as a pass mark. I urge you to vote no on the recommendation so that the process can be fixed before the final report. Thank you.
Thank you. Nominee?
What is the name? Your speaker's not on. Mr. Nominee?
Thank you, Alderman and councillors. My role here is that I was Planning and Development Manager and City Architect for 21 years during the time that the amalgamation took place with St Leonard's and Lilydale. So I was fairly intimately involved in the planning issues that came forward during the creation of the Relbia planning scheme. My view is, firstly, that the overwhelming expressions of resistance to the proposals that came forward in the meetings in the Albert Hall were not expressed anywhere as much as they should have been, and that really needs to be corrected, and I think that's not included in the petition response. In my view, there were 4 major reasons in planning terms why the 4 hectare lot size, the 4 hectare minimum lot size, was selected and should be maintained, and they were the capacities of Glenwood and, to a lesser extent, Relbia Road, the issue of people wanting to have a rural pursuit in that area, particularly horse riding and so forth. The third being the capacity or incapacity of the soils to take the waste disposal that was required without having reticulated sewage, which is obviously an economic impossibility. And finally, if I can find my, the availability of water supply. These issues have really not changed, in my view, over the time, and I've been in Relbia for 27 years. What I think we need to do is look at what Relbia represents to Launceston, and that any change that increases the capacity of housing in Relbia is really going to decrease the amenity of the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Wise.
Mr Mayor, councillors, my family have lived in Relbia for 57 years at 87 Relbia Road. I'm representing them today because my parents are 81 and a lot of our neighbours who are unable to be here, and I'm looking at it in a different way. I'm not for the options that you have presented because I don't think you have done it fairly to the residents that live there. If you have to have a quorum for a meeting, then 21% out of the residents that live in Relbia is not a quorum. You have to contact everyone. There's a letter that came out yesterday about Glenwood Road and Relbia having some upgrades done. This is not on the website as an area to be done. Is this being done to make us happier in Relbia? Because at the town hall that you had, you asked what we wanted. We asked for footpaths. We even said we'd be happy with gravel footpaths. I've been walking up and down Relbia Road for 57 years and it's getting a little bit more dangerous with the cars on it. You add more people into that area and it's even more dangerous. We have cyclists, we have runners, we have walkers. It's a beautiful place for people to be. Doing what you're proposing and saying this is the way it's going to be is not going to be what you need to do for the Launceston City Council. It is an area where people can grow and have young families and bring them up in a rural environment close to Launceston. When you're sending out information, a lot of people, as you know, have not received the information from all the consultations that you've had done. If this was the case with the Launceston City Council and sort of a sudden you had 600 people that had not paid their rates, I'm sure you'll be able to visit us very soon. It takes a week to get a letter these days. That's if people are at home when it arrives. So you need to allow that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Springer.
Good afternoon. I'm attending today to voice my opinion in regard to the limited change scenario that Council had pushed in my face since day one of the so-called consultation process. In fact, that not all residents were informed in regard to the voting for the future of Relbia until some articles and letters to the editor appeared in the Examiner newspaper or by word of mouth. Residents, including myself, have been hindered trying to access the correct information from the Launceston City Council, and that the voting form was set out to influence residents to vote for no change. Residents have voted for no change at the Albert Hall meeting, signed a petition and also held a meeting at Relbia for residents on the 8th of February this year. I wonder why the Launceston City Council has just turned their backs on residents and sided with the developers forever change our lifestyle and the character of Relbia forever. Developers will come and go, make their money and quickly disappear and leave residents with the aftermath of more houses, traffic, loss of livelihood, no infrastructure, flooding and destroy our precious wildlife habitat. Not everything in life should be about money. Please leave this unique rural area alone for future generations to enjoy, as my family has for the past 4 generations. No change is enough change. I guess if it doesn't affect you, then it doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Genevieve Youngman.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillor. I'm here to put my opinion forward regarding the change for Relbia. There's a no change that was voted upon. We had a petition upon it. We've invited town planners out to come and see us. We've had 3 or 4 changes to what was initially sent forward to us. We've had limited response. It's been a difficult process. Also, with regards to, it is a blue chip area, it is a residential area, it is an expensive area where people have paid money to come and have space, rural area and that lifestyle. The proposal of limited change has a 50% more housing that can be built in the area. There is no infrastructure for the roads on that. There's sewerage problems. We're all on septic tanks. We have children that ride horses along that road. We moved out of it because that's what we were as our lifestyle. I can't see any area where they've put recreation. It's just been a difficult process to navigate. It's been a difficult process to understand, and the council seem to have an agenda that they may like this to go ahead because of housing and its close proximity to town. But from where I stand, I think Relbia is just perfect the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Youngman.
Afternoon, Mayor, Deputy Mayor and councillors. I've done a fair bit of work on this, and I can sort of see that there's been a process that's gone through. Logically, there's a major disconnect. There was meetings in the town hall, not town hall, Albert Hall. I didn't go to those meetings, but I understand from people there that there was a very strong view of no change for Relbia. How we've got from that to what's been recommended, I've got no idea. It does not represent the view of the majority of residents as represented by meetings like at the Fibre, which this gentleman here was at. There was 150 something people signed the register for that meeting, and there was at least another, I'd say 30 to 50 people outside. That was the first meeting. We've also asked for planners to come out and talk to us in the area. This is in the last few weeks, and they refuse. So, you know, consultation. The instructions read the survey of residents was flawed. Council instructions prior to completing the resident survey are to please read one or all of the following documents. There were 3 documents. The 3 documents refer to different scenarios, with one referring to the 3 scenarios in brief document and the other 2 to 4 scenarios. As a result, the instructions were obviously flawed and the survey results invalid and should be ignored. It appears to have been made the process as confusing as possible for residents, and the petition subsequently signed by 260 plus households in the space of a week when people are on holidays is against the preferred limited change scenario, which has been pushed hard. The mesh feasibility study refers to Relvia with 1,160 hectares to be cut into 21 pieces like a piece of cake. Page 5 notes 675 people and 268 households. Then the limited change scenario refers to an extra 528 people, that's plus 78.2%, an extra 157 dwellings, plus 58.5%. How is that classified as limited change? Please do not vote in favour of the mesh recommendation.
No, thank you. Your time is up. Peter De Angelis. Yeah, but his name's here. I'm just doing what I'm told. No, thank you. Teresa Pilling.
Alderman, thank you for listening to us today. I agree with everything the others have said, of course, but I attended the meetings at the Albert Hall, each of the meetings, and it was unanimous that there was for no change at Relvia, but somehow it's been pushed in our faces ever since that it's limited change, which is not the case. I've spoken to over 270 residents out there that have all want no change, just to leave Relvia alone as it is. I feel that the voting has been influenced as well with the way the forms were sent out to us with very little information and with clearly marked for limited change at the top of the page, which to me influences the voting. It's also, I found it disappointing that all the letters I've written to most aldermen have not been returned or replied to, nor have the phone calls. Thank you to Danny, to Paul and to Rob Soward for actually bothering to call back. I always feel there's been a hidden agenda to support the developers and not take any notice of the residents of Relvia, and that if I had purchased one block of land at 94 Relvia Road as an agricultural block, that's what it would stay as and not be developed into housing. And that when was the zoning changed on 94 Relvia Road? Because it seems that it's gone from rural use only to residential without any DA that I can find on the council website. So I just wonder when that was done. And it's all about you're not listening to the residents of Relvia, and that what are we actually gaining? Houses, but I really want you to think about what we're actually losing at Relvia. We're losing our lifestyle, that'll just evaporate, the tourists will stop coming there, and our flora and fauna will just be eradicated. Thank you.
Thank you. Brett Husband.
All my topics have been spoken for, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? That's all I have on the list. No other speakers? No one's coming forward, are they, Danny? No. Thank you. So I have item 16.1, the petition. Somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Walker. Is it as in the...
Is the motion to accept the petition? We've already done that.
No, we've already done that. Haven't you, if you read the agenda, item 16.1. So are you happy to move that? Someone happy to move a motion? Councillor Harris, is that the motion in the... Is there a seconder? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris.
I guess the Relbia rezoning or what the future of Relbia should look like is a very contentious issue, as seen by the lack of people wanting to nominate or otherwise for this particular motion. The recommendation is that we receive the petition, we provide advice to Mr Lowe if he feels there's been a code of conduct complaint, and we resolve to consider the final report and recommendations from the future Relbia project before determining our position. So, in fact, we still have the opportunity to determine our position once we get the final report and recommendations. This is not binding at the moment on us saying we're going to accept a limiting change. It is, in fact, simply saying we will continue to get the report, the final report and recommendations before we make our mind up. And so I think that is a clear for us to be able to do that. It doesn't lock us into any particular course of action at this stage. So I'll sit down and let the other councillors have their say on that particular aspect and see where we go from there.
Thank you. Question for Councillor Mackenzie.
Just a question. Suggestions have been made that we already have our final report. Is that the case?
See, who's General Manager? Hurst.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to clarify, we have the consultant's final report but not the officer's final report. So the consultant's final report was presented with a survey to get feedback from the residents of the options that were identified as as some alternatives, and officers are going to consider all of that, the public meetings that were held originally, the feedback that we've received since we went out with the options for consideration, and we'll compile a report to bring back to council.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, do you wish to speak?
I'll now speak. Thank you, and that just clarified what I thought was the situation. So it seems to me there were two issues that we're dealing with. One is the process, and I accept the comments made by others in regards to that being flawed. I do take some question in regards to a predetermined position about Relbia. Certainly, I do not have a predetermined position. The officers that have given us reports have never expressed a predetermined position. They've said that there are a number of options that have been put forward, and some of those have emanated from people from Relbia saying they'd like to be able to subdivide their blocks and do things like that with it. So as a consequence of that, it was seemingly timely for us to have a look and review whether Relbia needed to change. We may end up with doing absolutely nothing, and that may be the recommendation comes back from officers. I know that the officers said they've received a lot of information from members of the public from Relbia in regards to submissions that have been brought in over and above what Mr Lowe's put forward to us to take into consideration. Obviously, the MESH report will come in and form part of that intelligence that they'll use to come back as a report to councillors, on which we'll finally make a position that we will need to deal with. And as I understand it, if we do that, we'd then need to go to public consultation anyway, post any recommendations of any change to the planning scheme, which needs to be advertised in a 30-day period of time. So there are a number of processes that can still go through to change things that people don't like. The reality of it is we've been collecting information. I've been confused by the number of letters, and I do apologise to the lady who spoke that I didn't respond to it, but I have had a number and have been pushing those on to officers for them to respond to if required, or putting that as part of the package of information that's needed there, because ultimately I'm still in the information gathering stage from my point of view. I certainly don't have any predisposition. I know a lot of people who live in Relbia. I know those blocks are lovely blocks of land, they're expensive blocks of land. There's a huge amount of amenity that goes with living in and around the Relbia things, and it's the reason why a lot of people moved out there. So I can fully understand the comments that have been made to a lot of people. We haven't seen the final report from our officers as yet. My view is that we need to wait for that report to come back. I accept if there's a flawed process that's been gone, which has been gone through. I'd like to explore that further as we get the report coming back to make sure that we feel comfortable that we're getting all the information that we require in making any decisions that we may need to make. But at this stage, because we actually haven't determined a position at this point in time, I'm comfortable to accept the recommendation.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor, and I want to thank all of those that have spoken today, and certainly the more than 230 that have fed in to the process, either through response to the survey or indeed through other representations that have been made. I think it's really important when we use the phrase final report, we understand that the final report is indeed different to the strategic document that has come back from the consultant. So whilst it's true that the council will consider a final report that comes from the officers that will take into consideration the consultants' work undertaken, but also the 230 responses provided and indeed the petition received, that will be the final council report. I definitely understand. I've been on site, I've listened to people, I've spoken to people on the telephone, and I've read many, if not all, the things that have come across my desk with regard to the outpouring of community angst felt with regard to this particular project. But I say, as I said when I was on site and spoke to a number of the residents, that for me there was absolutely, and for the council I believe wholeheartedly, there is no predetermined position. I note that the origins of this work come from the Greater Launceston plan work and had their origins back to 2014. I reiterate that there are no developers that are influencing me or other members of this council with regard to the work undertaken, and I respect wholeheartedly the feeling that is coming from the community with regard to their feelings, the majority of their feelings with regard to the minimum lot size. So today I will be supporting the response to the petition, but I'm supporting it noting that the final report is not the MESH report, it's the officer report that will take into consideration the findings from MESH, but importantly the more than 230 responses that have been provided by the community, many of whom are sitting out there, and it is then that this council will determine its final position.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also like to acknowledge the representatives today and say that we hear you. We understand that where you live and the way you live is probably the most important thing in your life, and choosing where to live is probably the biggest decision you'll ever make. None of us want to take that away. We don't want to step in and change someone's life for the worse. That's not what we are here as councillors to do. The idea that we'd predetermine something based on what a developer would like, I think it really runs against the grain of everybody sitting at this table. I know there's always a sense, and we hear it bubble up through letters to the editor and posts on Facebook and all sorts of manners of ways, that somehow we are in collaboration with those who have the means of production in this community. I can guarantee you that I certainly do not, nor have I ever and nor will I ever. So we hear you, we're listening. This may be a flawed plan, this may have been a flawed collaboration and consultation, but really the amount of people who came to the Albert Hall that day goes to show how engaged this community is, because we don't always get this amount of people to the consultations. So please bear with us. We're still a way along this journey, and I hope that the next time we meet that you understand that we have listened.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, the Chair for a minute. I'll just say a few words. I support the Deputy, and I too want to thank the people and support all the speakers probably at this stage too for their words. And I want to apologise on behalf of the Council for any mistakes and errors and misunderstandings that have been out there that we have caused. If they're there, on behalf of the Council, I make that apology, because it would have made the system better without that. I know that. But I can say, as we've heard very clearly today, we haven't got a final report to consider yet. But different to some of the other councillors, I've probably made up my mind. I'm happy to say that. I've probably already had my mind made up that I believe the no change is the best way to go, and that's been my view, and it probably will be my view going forward. But I'm happy to sit down, support this recommendation, because we haven't come to that point in time in making that decision. When we do, I'm sure we'll have people here again to support us in that. But it's no changes. I hear that very clearly from the community, from those that I've spoken with and those that I've had correspondence from, and I can understand where they're coming from. So, but as for this motion, we're not deciding on any change or not at this stage. We are deciding on the process to continue. Flawed or not, I think we do need to continue that process. Thank you.
Back to you, Mayor.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, I'll get Councillor Harris. Do you wish to close?
I will. Thank you, and thank you to my fellow councillors for your words. As we said, no one here has a predetermined position, I believe, when this project started. Some will have made their mind up. I don't believe there's been any influence from developers or others to those around the table. Good planning is not a popularist exercise. Good planning requires you to look at good planning principles, and that is what must be undertaken for how the future of Relbia looks like. If you'd asked people 100 years ago, do they want a horse, a faster horse, or a motor car, I'm sure they would have said a faster horse. The reality is we have to look to the future, and we have to understand through good planning principles what is the best outcome for the city, for Relbia. And so we look forward to that final report from the councils, from the council officers, because it is very important. It's obviously very important to the current residents, but it's also very important for the city as a whole. So I look forward to that report and see how we go with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We now move back to item 10.1. Oh, I think I forgot to say we no longer sit as a planning authority, maybe way back there. But I apologise for that. We no longer sit as a planning authority. We go to Mayor's announcements. Just a couple of brief points to mention. It was great to go to the Business Excellence Awards and to see all the businesses that were recognised there, and councillors, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Finlay, Mackenzie, Harris and Stosenchek were there. It was a great night, very positive vibe, and it was really encouraging to see all the businesses and to find out about the businesses and how they are developing in our city. So very pleasing. Well done to the Chamber for continuing the awards, and well done to all those that were successful and those that runners up, because some of them have done a brilliant job just as well as the others as well. Also, it was always pleasing to have the public citizenship ceremony, another 45 citizens in our beautiful city coming from many, many different places around our world, and the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Finlay and Councillor Harris were there as well. And it's really positive. If you've never been to one, I encourage those that are listening to go along, really see the smiles on the faces and the joy on the faces and the encouragement you get from seeing these new people in our city. Some have been here 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years. But to finally become a citizen means so much to them, and it helps me to appreciate what we have as citizens of this beautiful country we live in. And then finally, just to say that the weekend over Easter was great to go along to and open the Northern Tasmanian Easter Croquet Tournament. Great to see people from around Tasmania and some from the mainland. Not all could come from the mainland this year because of the lockdowns that was happening on and off, but it was great to have it here. And the comments I get while I'm there from people locally, but also from Victoria in particular, how fortunate we are, or they were, to play or have those 8 courts there. Is it courts for croquet? I think so, isn't it? 8 of them there, and they think this is a great facility. So to the council, and I agree to the councillors here, to our staff, thank you for the maintenance of all that. Continue to look after that because they really appreciate it. And it's great to have people visiting and using those facilities as well. And that's it from myself. Thank you. Councillor reports. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 items today that I wanted to share with councillors. One was a new event that we saw spring up earlier this year. In fact, on the 20th of March, Council sponsored the inaugural Launceston Ukulele Jamboree. And whilst you may think, my goodness, what an event that might be, let me tell you that the 80 people in attendance, 3/4 of them came from other parts of the state. Many from the Huon Valley, many from the Meander Valley, many from the Northwest Coast. And it was sold out in a matter of days, and people spent money on accommodation, on meals, and of course on their registration. So I know that Jackie, who worked with our council officers and a small dedicated team to bring that inaugural event to fruition, was overwhelmed by the patronage that was received and the enthusiasm. There's a waiting list, so that means that the year 2 is going to be bigger and better, but I think is proof that our support of small events, which then grow into larger events that bring economic and social returns, are well worth the investment. The second and final item I wanted to share, Mayor, was on Friday the 26th of March. It was a great pleasure to represent yourself and the council in opening the Tasmanian Rotary District Conference with over 250 delegates from around the state. The weekend in Launceston was a hit, a great deal of organisation in creating a schedule, recreating and adapting to COVID conditions, but nonetheless a great number of people travelled from all over the state to enjoy that district conference, and again appreciated the council's support, particularly of the opening night function.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for doing that on my behalf. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Like you said, the Business Awards were a great success, as the Deputy Mayor said, the Rotary District Conference as well, although I was attending that as a Rotarian. I am here to report the Franklin House Association had a meeting. They had a very successful fair at the 21st of March, and they made a record sum of money for Franklin House, and it does show that, I guess, the community is recovering from COVID and people are returning to such events. Speaking of events, I attended along with a few other councillors here the Gospel According to Paul in the Princess Theatre, where we exceeded 374 people in the theatre, so we had to wear masks. So it was the first time I'd been in the theatre where we had to mask up. Again, it just shows the recovery in a post-COVID world until we get a full vaccinated population, I guess. Also, the Newstead College Association, I attended their annual meeting. Interestingly, their registrations for students is similar to last year, still in excess of 570, which is excellent, particularly when you consider that I think nearly all Launceston high schools now offer grade 11 and 12 options as well. So Newstead College is going along very well. And finally, the other thing to mention is the hydrogen energy lunch put on by the Bell Bay AMZ, and I can't remember, Advanced Manufacturing Zone, couldn't remember what the A stood for, where the Federal Minister was the guest speaker. A great luncheon, an opportunity to hear what that means for the whole of northern Tasmania from a federal perspective rather than just a state or local perspective, and that's a very exciting thing for the future of Launceston going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor reports? Questions by councillors is there from ones on notice. Any without notice today? No, so we move on. Launceston 13.1, Launceston Access Advisory Committee meeting. Moved Councillor Dawkins, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Dawkins?
Yes, please, just briefly. Thank you. We had another robust discussion on the location and number of accessible places for people with disabilities to park. It seems like this is an ongoing problem, and I hope one that we can rectify with the current work we're doing in the Activities District Parking Implementation Plan. Also, just to bring to your attention, there's a trial on audible electronic timetable machines on the bus stops in St John Street. There was agreement that there needed to be greater promotion of these. So, fantastic idea, clearly something for people with vision impairment that's extremely important. And I hope that moving forward we have a lot more of these kind of smart city ideas around how we resolve some of the accessibility issues for people visiting or living in Launceston. So all in all, a very good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, I just want to again go back and acknowledge the Access Framework for Action 2024 plan, which I think has been really well received. I think it's a terrific document, and it's really good to see the action plans that are actually flowing from that, which I think will take Launceston and beyond to greater places in regards to accessibility for our community. So congratulations to the Chair and the committee for all the work they're doing.
Thank you. Any other speakers? you wish to close, Councillor Dawkins? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 13.2, Tender Review Committee. Moved Councillor Spencer. Seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Spencer? Councillor Mackenzie? Any other councillor wish to speak to item 13.2, Tender Review Committee? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to 14.1, Councillor Workshop Report, which is there. Moved Deputy Mayor. Seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Deputy? Councillor Harris? Any councillor wish to speak to the workshops? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to 15.1, notice of motion, renaming of Batman Bridge. Moved Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor Dawkins. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Walker?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I do wish to speak to this, having put the motion up. And I will start by acknowledging Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and that we meet on Aboriginal land. And when we give a welcome to country, we pay respect to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. And some people might wonder why we say that. I hope that people can hear the continuity of spirit that's encapsulated in that. Elders past, present and emerging. Can you understand that those elders past, the old people, are here with us today, and they're waiting to be acknowledged, and they're waiting for us to pay respect? When we name a bridge, we usually do it in honour of someone. But unfortunately, I feel that there's no honour in naming a bridge after John Batman. I'm not going to give a history lesson today. It's very easy for people to look up the history of John Batman. He certainly was, as I say, in the council agenda, you know, a significant figure in colonial events. Of course, there's no doubt about that. But he was also clearly responsible for the deaths of Tasmanian Aboriginal men, women and children. And it's for this reason that his name should never have been used in any public nomenclature. I'd like this to be a unanimous decision today. I'd like to think this will be another step along the long road of reconciliation. But I also want to clear up a couple of things. First of all, I suppose this is not about dual naming. I know at the moment the state government's in a process of negotiating Aboriginal names for place names around Tasmania, of which many we already use, some that are coming into new existence. But that's not what this is about today. I also want to address the notion that this is not in Launceston's municipality and therefore we should not put any thought to this. Of course, we're all part of the Tamar Valley and we're all on the Kanamaluka River, the Tamar River, and the Batman Bridge, magnificent structure as it is a significant construction in our region. And it was the Georgetown Council who recently suggested, indeed passed a motion, that they would like to put a commemorative monument next to Batman Bridge and that they would also seek the support of surrounding councils. And I suppose it was when I heard that that I thought, this cannot be allowed to go unchallenged. It might be well-meaning that we put this monument for the people who lived in this area for thousands of years, but to put it next to a bridge named after John Batman is to just rub salt into the very, very significant wounds that have been created and are borne by the people who not only live in that area, but live in the Launceston area as well. I note also that the CEO comments in regard to this motion do state that this could be seen as this motion could be seen as being political in nature. and I'd like to address that as well. It's certainly a matter of morality. It's a matter of looking into ourselves and asking whether we want to continue to acknowledge a man who so clearly went outside the bounds of his authority, who acted with disregard, with wanton disregard. It wasn't just that he was scurrilous or that he was a rogue, a lovable rogue or anything like that. He was a serial murderer outside the bounds of what was accepted at the time. So it's definitely a matter of morality, and it's also a cultural matter. It's a matter of trying to understand and bring together two cultures in a gesture of reconciliation. But I'd like to think it's not a political matter. I was heartened to see that both the Labor and Liberal government both were quite happy to state that they're open to considering a name change. That was a really positive thing to hear, and I thank them and congratulate them for that. But now it's our turn as councillors and as a council to promote that idea and to take that forward to support that process.
Thank you, Councillor. Your time is up. Do you need an extension? Yes?
Only very short, thank you, Mayor.
Move, Councillor Deputy Mayor, second to Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll finish simply by saying that, of course, I'd like this to be a unanimous decision today. Of course, Batman's name stayed in the past. That might be an appropriate way to look at that. You hear people say, oh, it's nothing to do with Launceston, it's nothing to do with council. Of course, we know that the welfare of our people that live in this area is of importance to us and is of significance to council actions. And this is one small way that council can take that step along the long road to reconciliation. And I do urge all councillors to support it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. It saddens me as I've got older and I've realised how little we really know about our community. As you may know, my father's been on Cunnamalooka River Tamer as a rowing coach, well, he's 60 years really, and I told him the name of the river and it nearly made him cry. Like, he knew it sort of in his heart, but he'd never heard it. He'd never really noticed it before, even though the river's been his entire life. And, you know, as children, we'd take family trips down to Batman Bridge. It was a word we used a lot. We loved the structure. It was an iconic structure. You know, a day on the river wasn't complete without some sort of discussion about the bridge or what you might do near it, or whether or not the ice cream truck was going to be parked on the other side. But I didn't ever know who Batman was. No one ever taught me who Batman was. I didn't learn it at school. I didn't seek to find out. It wasn't in my Encyclopaedia Britannica. If it was, I never came across that page and I wasn't looking for it. So I have gone looking for it as I've got older to find out about the history of where I live. For better or worse, I am Tasmanian. I'm made up of all of the things that makes a Tasmanian. We do have colonial ancestry. We do have convict ancestry. We have Victorian Aboriginal ancestry. We've got it all. But to continue to name these iconic structures and monuments after people that did not come with goodwill, that did not come with good intent, that did not follow instructions, that were rogues and were murderers, I think we don't take the chance to have that conversation and really understand who we are if we don't have motions like this brought to the council table, because, no, this is outside the scope of our usual work. Of course it is. You know, the reason that I believe Councillor Walker brought this motion today is because he passionately believes that we should change. We should change the things that are still in the present that affect the people who were so harshly dealt such horrible blows in the past. And what I've learned about wanting to be a good ally to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia is that I'm not responsible for the past, but I am responsible for the future. And that's why I seconded this motion today, and that's why I'll vote for this motion today. I do believe that the ultimate decision should be made by the Aboriginal peoples for whom this really deeply affects. I don't think there are many people in Launceston who are going to stand behind a banner and say, John Batman, my hero. Of course they're not. He's no one's hero. The electorate that was named after him in Melbourne was changed really without too much fanfare at all. We change names. We do it all the time. We haven't done a lot in this area, around this region, but I think it's time to do that now. We are a progressive, wealthy, enlightened, educated society, and we can move with the times. We can take on these changes. We can listen to all of the Aboriginal voices, and we can help make those decisions. So whilst I understand that the placing of the sculpture, as put forward by Georgetown Council, might not be the way to go, I think in pushing that forward, they've enabled this conversation to happen. And when I read the Premier's comments in the paper recently, I was delighted that he decided he wasn't going to take a stance, because during an election, this is when a very decisive leader, which our Premier certainly is, it is the time that he would make a decision, and he would name that up and he would stand behind it, because he's really not afraid of anyone. But he made the right decision, in my opinion, to say, I'm open to change. So I'm heartened by this. I hope you all take heart from this, and I hope you vote for Councillor Walker's motion today and keep continuing Launceston's progressive voice as a council, and be a part of a good conversation that we should all want to be a part of.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I rise not to speak in support of the motion, not because I don't disagree with the sentiment of the motion. I guess, as most people know here, I'm a man for process and lots of ways we go through things. My sense is that we picked the Batman Bridge. Are there other iconic names that should be challenged as well? And therefore a more holistic process, and I would have preferred the motion to have been more holistic about reviewing names that might be sort of causing angst amongst the Aboriginal community, so that we can look at that as a totality and say, okay, well, let's look through our deep, dark past and see if there are names in history that we should be reviewing as names that we currently continue to use. Again, so therefore my view is a more holistic view of it, and therefore doing this in isolation sort of goes outside my sense of process, in that we should be looking at it more holistically. I also look at reconciliation. We as a council sort of set out on a journey to do something about this 2 or 3 years ago. We still haven't got there. I understand there are funds in the budget for us to process the reconciliation process with the Aboriginal people through the Launceston City Council, and I hope we really get to that in the near future, because it is something that's been sort of burgeoning and it's been there for quite some time that we need to actually deal with. Again, the other issue is whose jurisdiction, and again, we talk about, yes, we can have a passion for our people and we can make statements and comments, but the reality of it is the bridge is not in our municipality. It's in the West Tamar Council on one side, I think the Georgetown Council on another side, and the bridge, I think, is owned by the state, and the road that goes across is state-owned. So therefore, they all need to be part of that process, I believe, in making that happen. My sense would be to fall in behind those organisations as they make that decision, and saying, if somebody wrote to me and said, would we put a letter of support in behind them, I'd be happy to do that, but I don't think that we should be leading the process. We have a number of issues within our own community that we should be looking at in the first instance. So as a consequence of that, my sense is we should be looking at a total view of what the names are that are being used that may be offensive to the Aboriginal people and the state, on the basis that most of those will come through the state nomenclature. Should be looking at a process on how we might deliver an outcome that satisfies everybody, including the Aboriginal people, and takes away that level of offence. Certainly have no problem with the name being changed, and matter of fact, I'd be quite supportive of the name being changed, but I don't believe that's our role here today.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. John Batman, I've never heard of him. I've heard of him. I've never had nothing to do with him until last night. I read 50 pages about the history of it, and I've done something to my eyes doing it. I was horrified what I actually read, chasing a mother with a 2-year-old child and shooting her. Just horrible. Glover, the painter, reckons he was a rogue, a murderer, untrustworthy and a liar. I know we can't change it, but I appreciate Tim putting this on the table for us to discuss. Honestly, I would support a name change. I know it's nothing to do with this council, but technically we'll put it on the table and it's out there that other governments can discuss it and maybe we can change the name. I've actually worked up the top of the Batman Bridge, on the top of the A-frame. It's a magnificent structure, unbelievable. And I will be supporting Tim's motion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris.
Thank you. And thank you, Tim, for putting the motion. I, like Councillor Spencer, had to do my homework and found similar historical facts about Mr Batman. It was curious that Batman, who came from Launceston, had nothing else named after him. And so I am curious as to why in 1967 or thereabouts the Batman Bridge was so named. Interestingly, there were Batman streets and the electorate of Batman in Melbourne, but the electorate has since been changed. And again, the reasons why that are perhaps obvious when you read the history. I came to this with an open mind. The motion that Tim has written is not particularly onerous on us, but I do respect Councillor Mackenzie's comments that it's not in our area, and it's not. It isn't our bridge, and it's not. It's the state government. And perhaps there should be a broader review, and certainly I would support that as well. As should be our own reconciliation plan that we have talked about. That doesn't seem to have come up for anything. We have budget, I understand. The City of Hobart have theirs. This may or may not come up in our reconciliation plan for the reasons that I stated, that it's not actually in our area. And so would a plan for Launceston include something that's in another municipality? Would it include something in Hobart or otherwise? I don't know. It is a touchy one. I am still yet to be convinced one way or the other. I hope the other councillors who haven't yet spoken do. I have started off in one way and wavered around a little bit as others have spoken, so I am available for people to influence. So I'll leave it to those who haven't yet spoken before we vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and I too want to thank Councillor Walker for his passion in this area. I note that we were about to endorse a process to develop a reconciliation action plan, and it was Councillor Walker's own council at that time that suggested that council laws and the organisation needed to strengthen its relationship with the Indigenous community before we went down that path. So I feel in some instances that it's a shame that we don't have the grounding, that is, a holistic reconciliation action plan that is focused on the municipality and on our organisation, because I feel like should we have had that work undertaken as we had budgeted and planned and resourced to do at the time, we would have a more open, holistic picture of where we're heading. Because, like Councillor Walker has said, there's lots of work for us to do in this area, and we'd identified that. We'd set aside resource and we'd set aside time and budget and the will to do that. On the other side, it's blatantly obvious that we do need a pathway to change the name of this bridge, but we also need a pathway to change a whole lot of other very offensive, hurtful, harmful titles that do nothing but obstruct the reconciliation of those First Nations people that have been damaged and hurt so much over the years, as the history will tell. I feel like the suggestion from the Georgetown Council that we fall behind their idea of a monument and a plaque, and importantly consult with our collective Aboriginal communities, would have been the way to go. And the reason I say that is, of course, the naming of the bridge would have come up in speaking with the Aboriginal communities as a result of wanting to put a First Nations monument and artwork right next to it. And so I feel like in some ways we've kind of overtaken what it was that the Georgetown community and Georgetown Council set about doing, which I guess was engaging in conversation, was engaging and bringing the community along with them. I certainly understand and appreciate Councillor Walker's passion for the space and for the work. And as I say, it's blatantly obvious that we need a pathway to change the name of this and other structures. I just wonder if had it been embedded in a reconciliation action plan, if it had come to a workshop and we're able to unpack further the unanimous vote that came from the Georgetown Council, which in its first dot point sought Aboriginal communities to be consulted with, I wonder if we'd have brought more people along with us and still got eventually the same result. I think that's the way that I would prefer to go. And I, as I say, definitely believe that Batman was an outlier and someone who, you know, shouldn't be celebrated, but there are other structures, other things that need to be looked at as well.
I thank you, Deputy. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Look, I totally agree with the Deputy, 100%. Again, I congratulate Councillor Walker for bringing it up. I know it's a thing of passion with you. Whether there are other influencing thoughts involved, don't know. But I know you did it out of genuine belief. So for that reason, I congratulate you. Councillor McKenzie was right on. I don't believe this should be done in isolation. I think it's something that we should do collectively. I can see us coming back next year and the month after that, and the month after that. I can remember when there was a pub in town called the Batman Faulkner. It's now back to the Cornwall. There's a reason for that. And there is no question that John Batman wasn't a particularly nice gentleman. You wouldn't want him babysitting your children, I would think. But I see where this is going. I see the intent. I think, as the Deputy said, Georgetown Council is probably where it should be. It's not our bridge for either end. We should support the attempt to try and change this, and we definitely should support the endeavour to change the name. But I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Walker, you wish to close?
If you don't wish to speak to it, Mayor, I will close. Thank you very much. Of course, you look around and you ask, who will lead this process? You can point to Georgetown Council, you can point to the state government. They haven't led this process. This is an opportunity for us around the table to lead that process today. It's quite a unique opportunity that's being presented to you. This is an easy change. It's not something that will happen overnight. If we were to support this motion today, I guess it would be years until the process came to fruition, if it came to fruition at all. What I'm asking you to do, as a collective council, as is obvious in the motion, is to acknowledge that Batman is an inappropriate name for clear historic reasons, to agree to write to the state government to request a process to begin, and to agree to write to the other councils involved in this. Now, when it comes to Georgetown Council, who I will say, I've long thought this name needs to change, as have a lot of people. But when Georgetown Council unanimously passed their motion to put a monument next to Batman Bridge, I had no alternative but to move this motion. It may be well-intentioned that would be an appropriate way to acknowledge the Aboriginal people of the region, but it is also highly insulting to put it next to a bridge named after a killer of Aboriginals. I can't state that strongly enough. So here we have an easy opportunity. It should be that the name is offensive to you as a white fella. It should be that you recognise that it is white fellas who built the bridge. It is white fellas who gave the name to the bridge. It's a white fella the bridge is named after. It is our responsibility to make some effort towards reconciliation. I'm not saying that anyone here is suggesting that it's the Aboriginals' responsibility, but sometimes I feel as though that's an underlying sentiment, that it's someone else's job to make a complaint. It's someone else's job to progress these sort of things. Well, here, it's our job. Here, it is white fellas not black fellas, it's white fellas who have created this situation. We've created a situation where we are celebrating, where we are honouring a man who clearly, even judged by his own contemporaries, was, as described earlier, a cheat, a liar, a scoundrel, a thief and a murderer. That's, as difficult as it may be to accept, times are changing. We can be a part of that change. So I'll just finish by acknowledging that Aboriginal people have long called for this change. That is probably apparent to most people. And I will acknowledge that it's not something that's going to go away. It will change. You have the choice now to be a part of that change. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? So that's carried. Thank you. We'll move on to 16.2. Someone happy to move that? Deputy Mayor. Second is Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak to it? Councillor McKenzie. Wish to speak? Any councillor wish to speak to 16.2? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That is all councillors present. That is carried. We move on to 18.1, proposed street names. Move Councillor McKenzie. Second of Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
All stated in the report.
Councillor Harris? Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. 18.2, concessional entry policy review. Someone happy to move? Councillor McKenzie. Second to Councillor Harris. Happy to. You want to speak to it, Councillor McKenzie?
I think it's just it's been well crafted. Obviously, consideration's gone into things that have happened in the past, and I think the report outlines the changes that have been done to the policy, which all make sense to me.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Yes, I will. Just briefly, written up in here is about the smart card for pensioners to use to access our waste disposal sites, and I'd love to see some promotion of that. Certainly my mother-in-law, who is on a pension, had no idea that such a thing existed. So I'm using her as a sample size of one, admittedly, but I think there's plenty of other people out there who would be not aware of this service that we provide, and perhaps some promotion of it would be well worth our while. I guess we could say we don't want to encourage lots of, because it has a cost to us as a council, but I think also there are many people who may choose to go and dump their rubbish elsewhere, unaware that such a facility will enable them to go and dump their rubbish for free. So from my point of view, I reckon we should be promoting what is actually clearly a very good facility or service that we offer to our pensioners and others in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Deputy Mayor?
Just briefly, would love to recognise the continual process of refining that has gone into this review. I know that particularly with regard to the concessional entry and also with regard to the community organisations, there's always a whole raft of work that supports the assessment of those and particularly, I guess, the improvement that we're seeing across community organisations with regard to the way that they are dealing with those items that can be recycled. So really just to thank and congratulate the team that are constantly refining and reviewing this to get the best outcomes for not only the organisation but indeed the environment, which is appreciated.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker?
Yes, Councillor, I must admit I just was a little bit in shock about having the motion passed, and I very much thank the Council for that. But I was at this meeting, and I do appreciate the work that Jess and Mr Attard have done reviewing the concessional entry policy. There were a few strange anomalies that we found in the process, and it was quite enlightening for myself and also Councillor Spencer to go through those, just to get some consistency amongst where these concessions go. And it is a credit to the Launceston City Council the way that we do provide this for communities, and we do consistently monitor it to make sure that it's not being taken advantage of and that it's providing the best outcome in terms of our waste facility. There are, of course, other areas that we continually have to address in terms of waste, and we certainly have to be aware that we are actively trying to reduce waste, and we do that also through this concessional entry policy. So in saying all that, I'd just like to say, yeah, thank you very much to the team, and long may it continue. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now have a motion to go into closed council. As noted there, Councillor Harris moved, seconded Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. That is carried. Thank you. We're now going to close council. Yep, so we're back in open council. Somebody happy to move a motion that we endorse the decisions taken to close? Move Councillor Cox, second Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We close the meeting. Thank you.